Any sufficiently advanced civilization is indistinguishable from God. Schirmer's Law. The Asgard are one of Earth's closest allies, and were once amongst the most advanced civilizations in the Stargate universe. Much of Asgard history is extremely muddled. There is a strong lack of definitive dates. Also, most of Asgard history comes from expanded materials, which tends to be contentious in its canonicity. This actually comes from multiple sources of expanded media, but one of them really takes the cake. A lot of the details regarding the Asgard history comes from a book that contains contradictions to things said in the series. Not necessarily about the Asgard, mind you, but contradictions nonetheless. For example, they say that most Jaffa do not carry symbiotes. Only a handful of worthy warriors are given one as an honor because the Goa'uld do not trust the Jaffa with their young. That the act of implanting a symbiote is what destroys the Jaffa immune system. This directly contradicts what is said in the series on multiple occasions, and several significant plot points. Tritonin was important for the Jaffa because the Jaffa's dependence on symbiotes. They didn't need to rely on the Goa'uld for survival. Tilk interrupted Ryak getting his Primta, and he nearly died as a result. You have characters like Nessa, who became of age and had to receive her first symbiote, or was going to die if she didn't get one. So while I didn't see anything contradictory in the Asgard section, it's worth keeping in mind. There is also a lack of serious dates. At one point, their history was described as spanning 100,000 years.
If we do not do this, our whole civilization, 100,000 years of history, will be wiped out forever.
However, this leaves a lot of room for interpretation. Is that rounding? An estimate? Also, what counts as your history? Just a thought experiment. How much history did the Tari have? No, don't look it up, just take a guess. Got your guess? The first written human record is around 6,000 years ago, at around 4000 BC. The issue is 100,000 years is very vague. Maybe the real number is 125,000 years and he rounded, or maybe 75,000 years. Maybe he just got the number wrong. And when does history start? Keep in mind that the number comes from the lost tribe of Asgard who spent 10,000 years isolated. So maybe when he says 100,000 years, what he really means is 110,000 years because they've been isolated for so long. All of this is something to keep in mind when moving forward. We do not know when, but at some point in time, the Asgard began conducting genetics experiments. Okay, experiments isn't the right word. They weren't experimenting. They were manipulating their own DNA to produce superior results. I believe the term is biopunk. If cyberpunk is the enhancement of the body through manipulation of cybernetics, then biopunk is the enhancement of the body through manipulation of biology. They were an intergalactic civilization and had been colonizing multiple galaxies for a while by this point. While they had not ascended yet, they were close. For those unaware, ascension is when one sheds their physical body and ascends to a higher plane of existence. The most well-known to have done this were the Alterans, who became so biologically advanced they left this plane of existence. The Asgard were on the cusp of this, with a few of their members ascending. While the Asgard Greys are the familiar faces today, back then, they were still almost human in appearance, albino with elongated heads. Female members of the species even had hair. However, unbeknownst to them, their genetic tampering had introduced a small genetic defect. Small, but persistent. By the time they realized it was there, every Asgard had it. However, it was a minor issue that would resolve itself. This is vague, but it does make a degree of sense. Every human on the planet has some sort of genetic defect. However, this defect is incredibly minor to the point of unnoticeable and is resolved with genetic diversification through breeding. The Asgard were banking on something similar. A few generations of natural breeding and this defect would be worked out. And it could have, if they were not struck by a plague known as Baryons syndrome. There are no details on this plague, only that it wiped out 60% of the Asgard race, and the survivors were afflicted with cellular degradation. After only a single generation, 75% of the survivors became sterile. And for those who don't want to math, it means that after the plague, only 10% of the original Asgard population could reproduce. And while it was a large number, it didn't have the genetic diversity to naturally resolve the genetic degradation. At the time, it was minor, and the Asgard were confident that they could find a solution with time. They used their mastery of genetics and biology to stave off its effects, and they used cloning to try to stave off death. They would make a clone of the Asgard and transfer the consciousness. However, solving the problem took far longer than anticipated. The Asgard kept a base genetic sample to clone from, but every few thousand years, that sample would degrade to the point they would need to acquire a new one, from the clone. And so the process continued. Every few thousand years, they would need to use the current clone to provide fresh genetic material, which would in turn last a few thousand years in storage until they tried again. And thus the cycle continued until the Asgard became clones of clones of clones, each generation introducing small flaws that are compounded by the previous generations. If we say that a preserved genetic sample can last 10,000 years, then that would mean every Asgard is 30 generations of clones. And that's assuming that sample wasn't destroyed by a certain robotic race that came along. At around 30,000 years ago, an Asgard ship was launched from the Asgard homeworld. While they still had the genetic defects present in all Asgard, theirs was not as serious and was believed to be reversible at the time. Because of some failure in the navigational systems, that ship was lost and its crew was put into suspended animation. Why the ship was launched is unknown. Perhaps they were seeking a cure, or perhaps it was a religious event.
Why does it always have to be a religious thing with you? Maybe they're coming from a swap meet.
The ship would be adrift for 30,000 years before it finally crashed onto a planet in the Milky Way. And if you're aware of just how big an empty space is, that is a minor miracle. At around 15,000 years ago, the Asgard, Ancients, Furlings, and Nox had become allies, as the most advanced civilizations in the universe, an alliance of 4 great races. Around this time, the Asgard had run across the Goa'uld. The Goa'uld themselves had just been through a civil war that had devastated the Milky Way galaxy, wiping out a significant number of its intelligent life and advanced races. And I do mean devastated. I can cover just how much carnage was wrought from the war when I talk about the Goa'uld. But seeing the devastation on this scale, you can imagine the Asgard were not pleased. So the two factions declared war on each other. At first, the Goa'uld were excited for this. They had been the dominant civilization for around 10,000 years by this point, and their civil war had wiped out almost all their host races, as well as themselves. For them, the Asgard represented a chance to try again, a new civilization to conquer, a new host to take. But in this case, they bite off more than they can chew. The Asgard were vastly more powerful than any civilization they had come across before, and while there were some victories, they were hard fought. There are talks of battles where Goa'uld require 10-to-1 odds in order to match Asgard might. The most notable being a battle above Stenos, where an Asgard ship battled 10 motherships. All 11 ships were destroyed. Fact was, the Asgard were leading a charge into a war of extermination.
Oh, come on, you gotta love those guys.
The Supreme System Lord at the time, Ra, led the countercharge, but he too suffered crippling defeat. His host was killed, so he tried taking an Asgard host. In this case, it was the Asgard known as Famir. But with the Asgard's crumbling biology, the Asgard made poor hosts. But this changed when the Goa'uld suddenly found a new source of hosts: humans. Humans made great hosts. Their DNA was easily malleable, which let the Goa'uld modify their DNA to create a new race known as the Jaffa. And they could be bred in high numbers. With this new discovery, the Goa'uld surged back against the Asgard, and soon the two forces found themselves in a stalemate. 10,000 years ago, a small group of Asgard left Pegasus in search of a cure. But around this time, the Ancients had started a war with the Wraith. These Asgard, the Vanir, used the conflict to hide their research. Pegasus was home to humans, whose DNA was very similar to the Asgard from a long time ago. Here they conducted experiments on humans while the Ancients and Wraith battled. They had expected the Ancients to emerge victorious, given the technological difference. Even if the Ancients couldn't tolerate their experiments, they at least wouldn't try to exterminate the Vanir. However, after a 100-year war, it was the Wraith who won. The Vanir would lose their intergalactic ships to the Wraith, and they did not have the resources to build more. So they were effectively stuck in Pegasus. They were forced to abandon their settlements and hide on a planet with a toxic atmosphere, where they hoped the Wraith would never find them. Now, you might be wondering, what about the replicators? The issue is, we don't actually know when exactly the replicators were discovered. Only that one day, on an isolated planet in the Asgard home galaxy, the Asgard found strange mechanical blocks. The creators of these blocks were not present. The Asgard took these blocks aboard their ships, unaware of what they were dealing with. The blocks activated and came together, forming mechanical insects that devoured the ship and learned from the computers. And they used the ship's materials to replicate and build more of themselves. And so the Asgard aptly named these creatures replicators. At first, the Asgards were confident they could handle the minor inconvenience, but every tool and technology the Asgard used against the replicators served to feed their evolution and make them stronger. As the situation worsened, more and more ships were called back to the home galaxy to help combat the threat. The Asgard continuously conjured up more and more advanced technology to battle the replicators, and the replicators grew more and more advanced as a result. We don't really know how long the Asgards have been battling the replicators, only that around 2,000 years ago, so much of the Asgard had pulled out the Milky Way, it looked like they were going to lose the war with the Goa'uld, and would be unable to protect the people. So they devised a plan. There are some scattered rumors of some threat in the Asgard home galaxy, but the Goa'uld remained largely oblivious to what was happening. So the Asgard declared a truce and drew up the Protected Planets Treaty. According to Cronus, the treaty recognizes that the human species exists for the purpose of serving the Goa'uld.
Are you saying you're limiting our development?
The treaty recognizes that the human species exists for the purpose of serving the Goa'uld as hosts and slaves.
Excuse me?
However, it is unclear if this is explicitly stated or just Goa'uld interpretation. The Goa'uld would be permitted to rule, however certain planets and territories would be off limits as they are covered by the treaty. These planets usually contained human populations. The Goa'uld were not permitted to invade there. They would be a safe haven from the hell that would exist outside. The Asgard would not be permitted to intervene with natural disasters or artificially advance the population through technological means. Should the planet advance to a point they are deemed a threat to the Goa'uld, their protection under the treaty would be declared null and void, and they may invade. That definition lay solely on the Goa'uld. This treaty was to be, ironically, enforced by the Goa'uld, especially the System Lords. Should another Goa'uld violate the treaty and attack a protected planet, the System Lords are to muster up their forces and stop him. Should the treaty be violated, there would have to be a delegation with all parties involved being represented. This treaty was effectively a massive bluff to cover up the fact that the Asgard would have to soon declare defeat as the replicators and their own genetic degradation required more attention. However, it did work. Compared to the hundreds to thousands of planets under Goa'uld rule, only a few dozen or so planets beyond their reach was nothing. And while they had reached a stalemate with the Asgard, they acknowledged that the Asgard were the superior force. And of course, the treaty was not written in stone. The Asgard and the Goa'uld would sometimes meet to update the treaty, including removing planets and territories from it. Unfortunately, the Asgard would ultimately be unable to protect the Milky Way. Around 1,000 years ago, the Asgard lost all their ability to sexually reproduce. They can introduce some controlled mutations to avoid complete genetic breakdown, but that simply staved off the inevitable. Their only hope was to find a way to undo their genetic damage. Now this is where the main series would pick up. While the Asgard would occasionally visit Earth to study the humans, Earth only truly landed on their radar when Jack O'Neill gained access to ancient knowledge. That level of knowledge was too advanced for the human mind to hold. Imagine teaching an insect quantum physics. Realizing this, his subconscious mind directed him to the Asgard planet, who helped cure him. They didn't think humans had advanced to the point they could even seek the Asgard for help. Impressed, they began keeping a closer eye on Earth. Knowing Earth had angered the Goa'uld, they offered Earth to be covered under the Protected Planets Treaty. This demonstrated the flexibility of the treaty. The Asgard would grant the Goa'uld access to something known as the Passage of Nihilor, and in exchange, Earth was protected. However, the Goa'uld did have some conditions. Remember, a planet was not permitted to reach a point where they posed a threat to the Goa'uld Empire. The Goa'uld didn't see Earth as a threat just yet, but they saw the potential. So they wouldn't stifle human development on Earth, but in exchange, Earth would have to give up its Stargate.
Both of them.
Fortunately for Earth, Goa'uld nature flared. The summit was attended by the System Lords Cronus, Nirti, and you.
Me?
You is the name of the Goa'uld.
However, Nirti coveted Cronus' territory and opposed the treaty, so she tried to assassinate him and pin it on the Tari. But the Tari not only saved his life, but proved her treachery. Indebted to the Tari, don't get used to it, Cronus agrees Earth can keep the Stargate. However, the Goa'uld are permitted to defend their territories from Tari trespassers. This would prove to be a mistake, as the Tari continued being a thorn in Goa'uld's side. The Tari and the Asgard would continue relations, as the Tari would assist the Asgard with their battle against the Replicators. The first incident was when the Replicators learned of Milky Way and Earth via the Asgard ship, so piloted it to Earth to begin infestation. However, Earth's victory against the Replicators was unexpected, as they had been using increasingly advanced technology and making the situation worse. So it was more than a little shocking to see, instead of advanced technology, but clever use of primitive technology to defeat the Replicators. This tactic was demonstrated again after Carter thwarted a Replicator invasion of their home planet. The Asgard had built, you guessed it, an even more advanced weapon to use against the Replicators, named it in honor of O'Neill no less. Rather than wield this weapon against the Replicators, Carter used it to lure them away. They then used its self-destruct to destroy the Replicators chasing it. Oh, I have words for this scene, I'll get to that later. Expanded material would show other interactions with the Asgard and Tari. Example, when Odin tried to solve the Asgard genetic degradation by turning them into holographic life forms. But the test subjects got minds of their own and grew out of control, so SG-1 ultimately stepped in and had to resolve it. Jonas Quinn was on the team, so this obviously took place in Season 6. In an alternate timeline, O'Neill was not sent to stop the NID operation from stealing technology. Fed up, the Asgard removed Earth from the Protected Planets Treaty. Upon hearing Earth was no longer protected, the Goa'uld swiftly conquered it. After SG-1 discovers the android creator of the Replicator plague, they give her to the Asgard. Using her, the Asgard lay a trap. They couldn't find any weaknesses to exploit, so they instead used her signal and amplified it to the known universe. They called forth every Replicator to the home planet, where they set up a time dilation device. The field had a radius of 0.6 light years, and time was slowed down by 10 to the 4th power, meaning that time within the field would be moving 1/10,000th of its normal speed. However long they experience, 10,000 times that would happen outside. However, this once again fell into the common mistake of using advanced technology against the Replicators. Instead of slowing down the Replicators instead hijacked the device and used it to speed themselves up, consuming the entire planet. And I'm not just talking about the surface, they actually began going down, replacing it with Replicator blocks. Worse, they used the android to evolve again, creating human-form Replicators. Fortunately for the intervention of SG-1, they managed to activate the device and trap the Replicators. While this certainly staved off Asgard extinction, it didn't stop it. In the next year, the Asgard pulled out of the Milky Way almost entirely. The Replicators were slowed, but not stopped, and the Asgard still had to solve their genetic degradation problem. The Protected Planets Treaty was a giant bluff, but they soon found it near impossible to reinforce. The System Lords had called upon Anubis to solve their pest problems, and Anubis had knowledge and technology that let them match the Asgard.
Our days of bowing to the Asgard are finally over.
When Anubis finally led a full-scale assault on Earth, neither the System Lords nor the Asgard could stop him. It was ultimately O'Neill with ancient knowledge and technology that stopped Anubis. However, they had to put him in a stasis pod to save his life. The Asgard may not have shown up to save Earth, but it did show the Asgard's hand. Despite the advances made by the SGC, Earth was still woefully unprepared to withstand an assault from the Goa'uld, and many System Lords had begun to question the Asgard's absence. Desperate, the SG-1 seeks out the Asgard, who had been silent for a long time. They succeed in reconnecting with Thor, who was tasked with destroying the replicators. On his part, he created a black hole and had to consume the planet the replicators were trapped on. However, the replicators somehow survived long enough to rewire the time dilation device and use it to counter the black hole's effects and escape. The replicator plague was on the verge of extinction, but one false step and it will start again. The last surviving replicator ship arrived over Orilla and was blasted out of orbit. However, it caused replicator blocks to rain down on the planet. Fortunately, their salvation came from O'Neill, who used ancient technology and Asgard knowledge to build a device that would sever communication between replicator blocks, rendering them inert. This was an unprecedented piece of technology, as such a thing has been tried in the past and failed. However, it saved the Asgard as it cleansed the planet of replicators. Only a single replicator ship managed to escape, but for now, Asgard extinction was thwarted. However, the toll upon the Asgard was piling. Even without the replicators, they were unable to return to their former glory. When the Ori invaded the Milky Way, the Asgard could provide precious little to assist, at least up until the very end. You see, despite their alliance with Atari, the Asgard were extremely hesitant to provide them with advanced technology. At best, they gave the Atari ships advanced shields and beaming technology, but they were ultimately reluctant to supply the Atari with weapons. Even the transporter given to the Atari had failsafes to prevent it from being used offensively. However, this all changed. The Asgard went from spanning multiple galaxies to a single planet. It was on the Asgard homeworld of Orilla they chose to commit. YouTube has issues with this word. But before they did, they gave the Atari the totality of their knowledge and technology. The legacy of the Asgard are now carried by the Atari. Despite these events, the Asgard were not entirely extinct. At least not yet. In Pegasus, the stranded Vanir continued their research into curing their degradation. They were unbound by the ethical constraints of the Asgard High Council, and thus made more headway. However, the planet they hit upon grew even more inhospitable, to the point even their suits could not protect them. Left with no choice, they ventured back into the galaxy, where they came across the Altero device, an ancient weapon that would cause Wraith ships to explode when they tried to enter hyperspace. But an unfortunate side effect was its detonation of stargates, an explosion of several gigatons. Many humans in Pegasus built their cities and villages around the Stargate, and regularly used it for trade, which meant they would get wiped out, a death toll of millions. However, the Vanir deemed this to be acceptable losses.
I take that back. I have met an Asgard like you before. His name was Loki. And he was experimenting on humans too, until he was caught and brought to justice by the Asgard High Council.
Because they did not believe. The ends justify the means.
That's right.
And look where it got them.
This caught the attention of the Atlantis expedition, and the Altero device was forcibly shut down by John Shepard, who bombarded it from orbit.
Opening fire.
However, the Vanir were undeterred. The resolution to the Vanir came not from the series, but from expanded media. The Atlantis expedition would encounter the Vanir again, but this time they would work out a truce of sorts. They would return to the Milky Way, where there was a shrine that would allow communication with ascended beings. The one they contacted was named Ron, an Asgard who had ascended before their physical degradation had begun. Ascended Asgard were bound by the rules of no interference, but, like the ancients, some would find ways around the rules. Ron would descend back into her mortal form. Such a thing was a massive sacrifice, as not only is she unlikely to ascend again, but no physical form can contain the knowledge that comes with ascension. However, she vows to help the Vanir. There was a lot of genetic damage, and there was no guarantee that she would find a solution. But for the first time in tens of thousands of years, the Asgard had hope. I've mentioned it before, but the Asgard were among the most advanced races in the universe. But how advanced is that? If we want to measure length, we fall upon inches, centimeters, and feet. If we measure time, we use seconds, minutes, hours. If we wish to measure energy, we have joules. Unfortunately, there is no good way to measure level of advancement. While ways do exist, they are purely speculative and come with issues. The most common you've probably heard of is the Kardashev scale, which measures how much energy is consumed. But this has problems. For example, level 2 on the scale requires being able to utilize the energy comparable to that of a star's output. But let's say this fictional universe they discover a fuel source that could output more energy, like, Naquita. And let's take another fictional society that managed to achieve the same, but without this mystic fuel source. Who do you think is more advanced? There is also a matter of civilization scope. Let's say a disaster falls upon Earth and destroys 75% of the world's civilization. Energy consumption would drop like a rock, but the level of advanced technology would stay relatively the same. And the Asgard were fighting extinction, so their energy consumption would also drop. So I'm going to be using multiple scales to evaluate this. How much energy did the Asgard consume? We only have one given number, the Bliskner.
The Bliskner is powered by 4 neutrino ion generators. In your Earth units of measurement, each engine outputs a maximum of 1 billion
Yeah, my eyes glossed over right about there.
4 generators outputting 4 billion is... Hold up a sec. Watts are joules per second. 1 joule per second is 1 watt. 4 billion kilojoules is 4 trillion joules per second. That's 4 to the 12th power. That's also 4 to the 12th power wattage, not 15. Somebody ain't mathin' right. Anyways, to put this into perspective, that's 4 terawatts of energy. Human consumption of power across the globe is estimated to be around 18 terawatts. That means one Asgard ship uses around a quarter of the Earth's energy consumption per unit of time. Actually, possibly more. Look at the diction. Granted, maybe I'm reading too much into this, but generally, power plants are not referred to as engines. So it's possible that when Thor says engines, he means engines, meaning that the propulsion is outputting 4 billion kilojoules, meaning that the power plant is capable of significantly more energy, meaning that one ship could be possibly using the same amount of energy as Earth. One ship equaling a planet. Now keep in mind that this is how much energy they can output per second. Take a moment to think about how much energy it can output over its lifetime. Now take a moment to think about how big of an explosion that would be if that energy were all released at once. The O'Neill-class ship was one of the most advanced ships in the Asgard fleet. It was used to lure the replicator ships into hyperspace, then self-destruct, taking the ships with it. I did say I would get back to this scene. Even a second in hyperspace crosses millions of miles. More actually. In the Hatak analysis guide, I put the Hatak at around 3 million times the speed of light. The speed of light is also 186,000 miles per second, which means that 3 million times that is around 100 billion miles per second. Despite this, the explosion was so large that despite it fleeing the planet, not approaching, leaving, so that the blast would have to travel backwards, the blast wave actually made it back to the planet. Even if we say that the ship was moving slower than maximum hyperspeed, we're still talking about an explosion so large it sent a blast wave millions of miles in radius across the void of space. For reference, Earth is around 8,000 miles in diameter. Let that sink in. And I guess I shouldn't be surprised, as the ancients who are technologically comparable had the ZPM. Carter estimated that the tainted ZPM could have destroyed the entire solar system.
I was reading Dr. Lee's report about the tainted ZPM. I think he may have underestimated the explosive potential. I mean, it could have actually destroyed the entire solar system.
Which means a ship's self-destruct rivals that of a supernova. And that's just one ship. Imagine what a single planet produces. Let's look at civilizations and their equivalent. The ancients tried Project Arcturus, which was aimed at harnessing zero-point energy from the universe itself. But that came with complications. But they still used the ZPM, described as a universe in a bottle. They instead created a pocket dimension and would extract zero-point energy out of it instead. Both Asgard and Ori could collapse celestial bodies into black holes. The Asgard did it by increasing the star's gravity. If we were to assume that Hala stars like ours, then it would require a 10 trillion gravitational increase. It's hard to say just how old Asgard's civilization is. The Vanir said that their whole civilization had 100,000 years of history. But is this an exaggeration? And if not, when did they start? Mind you, they left for Pegasus 10,000 years ago, and I don't think they were keeping tabs on the Aesirs in the meantime. Still, let's go low and assume that the Asgard have 100,000 years of recorded history. For reference, the earliest recorded human history we have is around 5,000 years ago. Given all this, the Asgard would be around a high Type 3 to a low Type 4 civilization. Let's look at the Barrow scale, which evaluates things based on how small they can manipulate. Asgard ships are powered by neutrino ion generators. Neutrinos are the smallest non-zero mass particle we know of. It's far more advanced than our current technology can even conceive. Compare that to something like antimatter. Antimatter as a form of power consumption is speculative, but it is based on well-understood physics, and we have methods of reliably creating antimatter, albeit in quantities too small to be useful. We have no source of technology nor physics that can harness a neutrino. Even the act of detecting one is a small feat. Given this, the Asgard will rank Type 5- on the Barrow scale. Beyond energy and scope, what else could the Asgard do? Some of the most commonly seen technology is the free-aimed Asgard beaming. There is also when O'Neill got the ancient repository downloaded into his mind, knowledge so advanced his brain literally could not hold it, but the Asgard easily removed it from his brain. Twice, I might add. Some stuff like stasis, anti-gravity, free-aimed 3D holographic projection, matter creation using the computers to construct an object, then the transporters to create it, time dilation. There is also the shield technology. To put into perspective just how advanced Asgard's shields are, in Stargate Atlantis, they learned that the system's star is going to experience a coronal mass ejection larger than anything Earth has seen, a CME so big it would burn away the surface of the planet. Shepard's plan was to take the Daedalus, which was equipped with Asgard shields, close to the sun, close enough that the CME wouldn't get a chance to bloom out. It would instead hit the ship's shields and be deflected in all directions away from the planet. The only thing they needed to bring was a ZPM for power consumption. Keep in mind that the Tari 304 still used Naquita generators as opposed to Asgard neutrino ion generators. A blast powerful enough to scorch away the surface of a planet, and the Asgard shields withstood it. Asgard demonstrated the potency of their weapons when they gifted the Tari with the plasma beam weapons, the first weapons powerful enough to destroy an Ori warship. There was the Battle of the Supergate. What happened to the Asgard warship is unknown, and let's face it, this was really a battle between one Asgard ship and 4 Ori ships. The other ships were just kind of for decoration. Both Asgard and Ori could collapse celestial bodies into black holes. At one point in time, both Asgard and the Ancients were biologically advanced enough to ascend and leave their physical realm. The Asgard could destroy celestial bodies by crushing it, and had self-destructs bigger than a supernova, so it's no surprise the Asgard could explode planets, a feat also conducted by lesser races as well. They are able to convert your consciousness into digital form, and transfer it between bodies. The Asgard have the technology that could let themselves pass through shields. It is possible that the Vanir developed technology independent of the Aesir Asgard. It is also possible that the technology they use has not progressed since the Aesir Asgard, since the Aesir have more scientists and manufacturing capabilities. But the Vanir also have combat suits equipped with thrusters that allow them to fall from great distances. A handheld shield that can withstand several seconds of automatic gunfire from multiple automatic weapons. Internal heads-up display, self-destruct, and protection from hazardous environments. The Vanir also had pistol-like weapons that could stun. It's unknown if this is their design or just a setting. As well as what I can only describe as a portable elevator. Once upon a time, the Asgard biology was vastly more advanced and impressive. They were on the brink of ascension, with many members ascending. However, a combination of the plague as well as their own tinkering with biology introduced a minor defect. But this minor defect was exacerbated over time. Back then, they looked almost human. However, over the course of 30,000 years, that defect was exacerbated until we got the Asgard we know today. Short, frail, and very naked. They appear to lack many parts humans are used to, such as genitalia, as well as adrenal glands that could produce epinephrine. This could explain why the Asgard always appear so calm and collected. It's possible that many of their hormonal glands are missing. Their eyes are also very wide and appear almost jet black. By the time of the modern Asgard, they appear almost incapable of physical activity. The closest we see them is from the Vanir, who also use exoskeletons to enhance their physical abilities. Asgard society is largely unknown to us, as we only see the workings of their military and government. And even then, some parts are still fuzzy. The Asgard are led by the Asgard High Council. 7 members make up the governing body, including Freyr, Thor, and Penegal. The other members are unknown. It is also unknown if there are other branches to the Asgard government. It's also unknown how the council members were selected. Was it through a vote, a meritocracy? The Asgard military is headed by Thor, supreme commander of the Asgard fleet. Of all the Asgard, he has interacted with Earths the most often. The backbone of the Asgard fleet appears to be the Blissner-class mothership. However, to combat the replicators, the Asgard created even more powerful warships and named them after Jack O'Neill. There was also the Daniel Jackson-class science vessel, not created to be a warship, but the Asgard were desperate. Their society and culture is largely unknown. At the very least, their governing body is very benevolent, especially towards lesser races. They follow rules of minimal interference as opposed to non-interference. This is for a combination of reasons, one being that they are unable to actually interfere much. Because their resources were focused on replicators and solving their own genetic degradation, they mostly rely on occasional displays of strength to intimidate opponents. Another is that they fear what other civilizations can do with their technology. This scene with the Tari, the Asgard usually refused sharing technology, and even when they relented, they only provided defensive and utilitarian technology like the shields and transporter. It was only at the very end they finally relented and gave everything, and even then, there was hesitation. For primitive civilizations, they set themselves up as gods that provide rule, law, and a sense of direction for the people. They will sometimes leave behind advanced technology to protect the people, such as on Samaria, Thor's hammer was designed to target Goa'uld, and the Hall of Thor's Might was a series of tests to see if the people were ready to know the truth. There is a phrase, when all you have is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. The Asgard were scientific geniuses that not only dominated other civilizations with superior technology, but they would develop even better technology in response to any challenge. However, in the face of an enemy that is simply empowered by superior technology like the replicators, the Asgard could not conceive of any other solution. If your nation has some nature that allows you to be fueled by more advanced technology encountered, then the Asgard will become an all-you-can-eat buffet as they continuously conceive more and more powerful weapons to use against you. Meaning, you'll be eating good. Another weakness of the Asgard is obviously how distracted they are. By the time the Tari encountered the Asgard, their race was on the brink of extinction, partially from the replicators, and partially because they were studying how to save their race. Meaning that unless you pose a massive threat, the Asgard will likely resort to tactics of intimidation. They are powerful, make no mistake, but most of their forces are usually busy elsewhere. There is a reason the System Lords were made the enforcers of the Protected Planets Treaty. So if your military can attack multiple fronts at the same time, the Asgard might be able to easily take out some of your forces, but ultimately, there will be too few to take out all of them. However, if you are appropriately advanced, then you can charge in head first at the Asgard, knowing they are a shadow of their former selves. It really is a shame. The Asgard were once one of the most advanced races in the universe, and one of Earth's closest allies. Without the Alliance, all hopes and legacies now lie with the human race.